Dharmadas suggested that we talk about the challenges of the path at different phases or different times. And so I'm going to slice that one way, and Devi will slice it another way. And so I'm going to talk about the phases of coming onto the path, the middle part, so the beginning part, where you're just learning the techniques and maybe you're working your way up to take Kriya initiation, then the middle part, and then the part where you're an experienced devotee but you face other challenges. We see this really, really clearly in India, because in India we have lots and lots of people coming through. So, for instance, in Mumbai, when we give a class in the beginning meditation, we might get between 75 and 150 people taking that class, and we get that, every 2 months or so. So and all over India, huge numbers as compared to here. And then we have a progression where we lead people through a series of classes. There's the beginning meditation class, and then a little more advanced meditation class, then some knowledge like with Raja Yoga, then discipleship, and then Kriya for those who want to. And what we see there is the group of people coming in. Many of them are very highly motivated to attend everything needful and to establish whatever they're trying to establish in order to qualify for Kriya. But then we see a very distinct phase where maybe half of those people just fall off the map. And so that's a second stage that I'll talk about. And then the third stage, which you look around the room and you see people here, not so much in India, this is more in America, but people who've been on the path for 20 and 30 years and have been deeply connected. And they face, again, their separate sets of challenges. So I'll talk about those challenges that are typical, but more than that, the solution to the challenges. So coming back to the beginning phase, obviously in the beginning phase, what you're doing is that you're learning the techniques and the skills and the attitudes that will allow you to follow this path. Because Master came with quite a particular kind of path. When he was teaching, we hear, he went to Carnegie Hall and he had 5,000 people, or Los Angeles, the Philharmonic Auditorium and so on, all these thousands of people. But when he was going out, that wasn't really the work that he was doing. He would go in to a city, he called it his spiritual campaigns. So he would go into a city and he would be there maybe for 6 weeks. And so he would come into Philadelphia and he would give a few of these big auditorium, big lectures. But then he would give classes, a whole series of classes. And so for 6 weeks, the people would be taking a whole line of classes. And so he had quite a very well constructed way of bringing people onto the path and teaching them the skills and attitudes. And of course that's been passed down. And so we follow that, basically that same progression all along. So, he would give an introduction, and then he would have people teach Hong Sa. So if you go back to his lessons, for instance, you see this progression. So Ananda follows that same progression that Master set down, and the reason he set down that progression was it's like building a house. He was doing the foundation on which the house is going to be built. And there's, you can't start constructing the rooms or the roof before you've done the foundation and the walls. And so he was building that foundation. So coming back to that beginning phase, the foundation that is established there is, first of all, you need to learn just very basically how to sit for meditation, how to begin meditation. Then very quickly you encounter the fact that your mind is restless. You aren't focused. Now that is not going to go away in the foundation phase. That stays with you for the entire time that you're doing meditation, unless you have been able to so focus your mind that you no longer have any restlessness left. But that, for instance, we teach Hong Saw, which is to withdraw the breath. Hong Saw is a kind of a pranayama technique, because the bija mantra Hong Saw helps to withdraw the energy away from the periphery into the spine, and the fact that you're concentrated on the breath brings the energy up to the spiritual eye. That's basically the paradigm for what meditation is. It just gets a little bit more deep and a little bit more complicated or simple as you go along, but the whole of meditation is summed up in Hong Saw, to withdraw the energy and bring the energy up. And if you do that completely, you end up going into samadhi. But you begin with that very, very simple little practice of watching the breath and having a mantra with it. And so you learn that very, very early along the path. But the real challenge then is not to learn how to do the technique, but to do it in such a way that you accomplish the purpose of the technique. And I'm over 50 years into this, in this lifetime, and I'm still working on that. I still work daily on trying to deepen Hong Saw. And some days I do better, some days I do worse. But nonetheless, the essence of the Hong Saw technique is to bring complete stillness and eventually breathlessness to you. And so, but if you don't have that, then you need to keep working on it. But you can't work on it until you've learned Hong Saw and you've begun to practice it. So in that early phase, you're learning everything that you need to go into samadhi. If we were really ready for it, if our karma was such, if we were ready to release the ego, we could go into samadhi after the first 2 weeks of classes. Because it's not as if what we've received is qualitatively different from what we will receive later on. Naturally, for those of us who have Kriya, Kriya is like a much deeper Hong Saw, one might say. The same purpose is there, to withdraw the energy, to magnetize the spine, withdraw the energy, and eventually, especially at the end of the outer Kriya practice, to focus it completely at the spiritual eye, because this is the positive polarity in the body, and if we stay focused there long enough and powerfully enough, it will withdraw the energy from the kundalini, because we're like a battery. We have a north pole and a south pole, or positive pole and a negative pole, and ultimately we have to bring that energy together, and then it neutralizes. And when it neutralizes, then duality disappears. And so anyway, we learn all of those things during this first phase. In addition to learning those techniques, it also implies discipleship. Now, Ananda is one of the few paths in America that really focuses on discipleship the way that we do. In fact, in we have Gyandev, who many of you know. He's been on the board of directors, or was on the board of directors of the Yoga Alliance for many years. This is the group that certifies all of the yoga teachers. So if you wanted to have a legal certification to teach yoga, or especially to teach others to teach yoga, you get that certification from the Yoga Alliance. So Gyandev was on the board of that. So that represents, one might say, the association of yoga consciousness in this country. He had to constantly fight the battle to keep bringing the focus of yoga back to yoga, not to hatha yoga, not to physical things, not to anatomy, not to what the stretches do, not to a very complex kind of physiological learning curve. Bringing it back to the purpose of the yoga postures, the purpose of meditation is to bring us into a state of consciousness, which is yoga. That kind of, in America especially, has been pushed aside. And it's become the technique and not the goal that has become important. And so Master, knowing that tendency, because our masters came in Dwapara Yuga in order to give us the path that really works. And so let the others say, oh, that guru-disciple stuff, that's not for our age, that's something back there. We're past that now. Let them say that. I'd rather go along with Master. And if he emphasized the importance of the guru-disciple relationship, then focusing on that is a very, very important part of this first phase. So in order to get Kriya, naturally we have long ago decided, as Master did before us, that you need to be a disciple of this line. The reason for that is not organizational. It's not to collect people. It's not to try to get people to promise to be loyal to us. It's because until that consciousness is there, you have a disconnect between you and the way that grace flows. And it would be like saying, I'll learn how to, hard to get a quick example. I'll think about how to shoot a free throw in basketball, but I'm certainly not going to go out there and actually do it. And so if you want to have union with God, if that's why you're in the path of yoga, then you have to respect that there is a way that is accomplished, and that God then sends a guru to you, and it's that guru's job not only to train you in the techniques, but to help give blessings and grace and magnetism to guide us inwardly. And so all of us who are longtime devotees, we know how difficult it is inwardly to do Kriya properly, for instance. We're trying to do it right. Is this quite the way you do it? Do I feel the energy? How do I feel that energy? It isn't physical energy, but and so all of these questions come up. And if we don't have the guru to rely on inwardly, we don't have the answers to that, because then it's all within our own mind. So at any rate, I don't want to dwell on this too long, because I don't have all that much time. But in this early phase, we have to learn the techniques. We have to learn the attitudes of really connecting the desire to expand with the pathway that allows that expansion to happen. And then maybe the most important thing is that we have to, during this phase, establish the regularity of practice. And so at Ananda, we generally require that a person be meditating at least an hour and a half in order to receive Kriya each day. Now, we don't do that just because that's a hoop to jump through. We do it because unless a person has established that kind of a practice, then they can't really benefit from the overlay of a technique that is supposed to bring them inwardly, supposed to bring them into a state of stillness, lift the energy, and if possible, allow that stillness to deepen until there's union with God. That doesn't happen in 5 minutes. And so if a person isn't ready or willing to establish the beachhead of practice in their life of enough time for meditation to happen, then they can't fully benefit from this. Now, I say all of this because, as I was saying in India, people will be very motivated to receive Kriya. And so they'll establish an hour and a half of meditation practice. They'll go through all the courses. They'll answer all the things. They'll learn energization, which is also taught there. And they'll do all of these things, and then they'll receive Kriya, and then about half of them pretty quickly drop off the map. They go into a second phase, but unsuccessfully into a second phase. Now, I'm dwelling on this because most of us have been through this already, but all of us have to look and ask ourselves, are there cracks in my foundation? Because if there are cracks in your foundation that you have allowed to happen over a period of time, then you need to go back and fix those cracks. What's a crack in your foundation? Well, I no longer meditate an hour and a half a day, or I no longer do energization, or I no longer put much energy into relating to the guru. That's, I already did that, and now I've established other patterns and so on. So you need to go back. There's a phrase used mainly in Zen meditation, beginner's mind. You need to go back with beginner's mind and look at how strong and how well maintained your foundation is. And if it needs work, then you need to work on it, because you can't build a structure on top of a cracked foundation, or you can't build a strong structure. You can build a little one. And I should say, even the attempt to do a foundation and a structure, even if it isn't the Taj Mahal, you're way, way ahead of almost everybody else in the world. They're not interested in a spiritual path, a sincere spiritual path that requires discipline at all. Okay, now going into the second phase, what people face in that phase is that the world, it's as if with their willpower and their enthusiasm during the learning phase, they have held out the pressures of their life, held out the pressures of the world. Now they've achieved that, and it's like the enthusiasm to do what's needed in order to achieve a goal. The goal has been achieved, and now the pressures of life begin to come in on people. And when Devi and I teach in India, almost all of the time we hear questions. We'll have questions and answers this afternoon. In almost every question and answer phase, we hear a variation or the question of, I would really like to be on the spiritual path, to dedicate more, but I don't have any time. I don't have any space. I'm so busy. The family is demanding. The in-laws are, I can't maintain the space to carry on my spiritual life. And that, I would say, is the common difficulty of kind of the middle phase of the spiritual path. And honestly, unless we push back against those pressures, then we won't succeed. Unless you build this room has walls and a roof, and it encloses a space as a temple. And if we didn't have the walls and roof, and if we didn't maintain the walls and the roof, then if it rains this afternoon, the rain is just going to come in here. If it's windy, the wind is going to blow in here. If you don't maintain a temple in this middle phase of your life, then the forces of the world around you are just going to wreak havoc on your spiritual aspirations. And there's no easy way around this. You have to work within the conditions that you have. A mother of a young family has a lot of demands on them. And so it's one, you have to push back and create the space. But the other thing is that during this phase especially, you have to, if you want to be successful, you have to make, and I'm talking about deep within, because these are deep psychological or karmic patterns that we're trying to overcome. Somewhere deep within, you have to start working on seeing everything in your life as being part of your spiritual path. If you have the tendency to divide, especially during the early phase, it's almost like you should be dividing, because you're just learning and you need to say this is the spiritual practices and this is not. But during the second phase, you need to begin to unify those two together, because if you can't begin to see spirituality in your work, in your family, in your friends, in the people that you dislike, in all of that, if you can't see those people as being part of God, how are you going to achieve unity with God? Because God is all those people and all of those things. And so one of the big challenges in this phase is to go through those aspects of your life where even subconsciously you say, this is God, but this isn't God. Oh, I'll accept the fact that, all these nice people who come here to the temple, they're God, but I won't accept whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. I won't accept those politicians as being okay, as being part of God. They're doing wrong. And so we divide the world into right and wrong, and gradually we have to see that God is infused in everything. That doesn't mean that every action is right, because actions have the ignorance in them as well as wisdom. But we have to see that it is God, ignorant or wise, acting through everything. And so in this second phase especially, we have to establish enough of a time for our meditation, and this sometimes requires trade-offs. I've just read a little while ago, last week, Master wrote, I don't allow the boys, meaning the monks at Mount Washington, I don't allow the boys very much discretionary time because they don't know how to use it yet. And so we all have a lot of discretionary time, that we're not using very wisely. Even if we're really busy, we still have that discretionary time. And you just need to chip away. You know, Swami talked about how there's a specific gravity that we have, and spiritual specific gravity. What happens is you float at your specific gravity level, your normal level, and you're kind of in your comfort zone. I mean, it doesn't mean that you like it there, but it's your comfort zone. And to raise that specific gravity, you need to lighten your consciousness. And that takes work to do that. So during that second... Now, I'll end because most of us are in the third phase, which is we've been devotees for a long time. And there, the primary thing that we have to watch out for is, one, we have established patterns and habits, and some of those are not very good, and we have to weed those out. But at this later phase, it becomes kind of hard because some of those habits may have been there for a long time. If you've fallen back to you're meditating a half hour a day, and you that's your habit pattern, you've been doing that for 25 years, somebody comes along and says, well, you should be meditating more. It's hard to move off of that long-established rut, or move out of that long-established rut, even though you know that you should. All of us who've done communities and bigger groups, we started out naively thinking that the people who were with Ananda for a long time would all be our allies, so we would have morning meditations, and naturally all of the Ananda people, or those who'd been with Ananda for 20 years or 25 years, they would all come and support those morning meditations. And we found, no, that's not the way that it works. They've gotten into a habit of either not meditating enough so that they don't want to come and be pushed, or whatever the habit pattern is. They're not there for morning meditations. And I don't want to dwell on morning meditations because it gets to be a hot button item. But what I'm saying here is the principle. See, that at the later phase, you have to begin to look back at where your ruts are, and you have to force yourself out of those ruts. And it's not easy to do. But if you're going to progress, you can't progress. If you're going to go into new territory, you can't go into new territory by walking continually in the same pattern that you've walked in for 25 or 30 years. You have to go longer, and you have to go deeper. Normally at this time we have the time to do that, but as we age, our energy levels begin to drop a little bit, and so we have to push back against that also. But in the later phase, it really becomes a battle against going deeper and deeper, and in each meditation, Master so often said this. He said, try to make every meditation deeper than the previous one, and that's how you'll progress. Well, that's a challenging thing to do, but we should at least, when we sit, have the sensation, have the thought or the intention that I'm going to try to meditate in this meditation deeper than I did yesterday, deeper than I did last week, and to try to push that. As Master said, God doesn't mind our errors. He minds our indifference. And so he doesn't mind the fact that we aren't able to meditate deeper. He minds the indifference to not wanting to try to do that. And so in this latter phase, we need to try to go deeper and deeper, and we need then to stay away, because there are certain mental patterns that have been established. We need to stay away from those mental patterns that we know are going to bring our energy down. And by this time, normally we know what brings our energy down. Earlier on we may not, but we know that, I don't know, watching too many negative things on television is going to bring the energy down. To associate with the wrong people is going to bring the energy down. To have patterns of thought, of worry or anger or whatever those old patterns are, is going to bring our energy down. We need to identify those and then not so much try to work against those, but once you identify a negative pattern, the way to work against that is to begin to do the polar opposite. And so if you worry too much or if you're angry, then you need to emphasize faith. If you worry too much, you need to emphasize faith. Affirmation, I go forth in perfect faith in the power of omnipresent good. It will bring me what I need at the time I need it. And every time you worry, you need to counter that negative pulling energy with the polar opposite positive energy. But unless we do that work, we're going to plateau, and that plateau isn't flat. It gradually decreases because our energy level decreases. But it doesn't have to be that way. The elder phase should be the golden phase, and we should all have, during this time, this strong sense that we are headed for the barn, and by golly, we want to get into cosmic consciousness, or as close as we possibly can in that phase. So each of these phases has their challenges and their solutions, and it's a blessing. It's the way God set it up.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk about 3 different kinds of challenges that we face as devotees. The challenge, Swami said that a Native American told him once that in nature, if you find a poisonous plant, the antidote is always growing quite nearby. And so it is with the challenges in our spiritual life. The antidote isn't something we have to run and look up on Google, and it's the answer is inherent in the problem. Truly it is. And so what I'm going to talk about are the challenges for a devotee when we're going through hard times, divorce, health challenges, we lose our job, whatever it might be. But how does the devotee face those? And then the challenge of living in community. It's a whole other set of problems. It's a blessing, but there are also traps that are inherent in it. And when I say living in community, it doesn't necessarily mean living